What if I told you there are maps hidden in history that hold secrets modern cartographers still can't fully explain? Maps that don't just chart lands and oceans but whisper stories of lost civilizations, mythical creatures, and knowledge far ahead of their time. These aren't just directions, they're time capsules, blending art, science, and legend in ways that defy logic. Today, we're uncovering 30 of the most unusual maps from the ancient world, each one a puzzle waiting to be solved. Think about the last time you opened a map, maybe on your phone, pinpointing a coffee shop or a friend's house. Now imagine a map that doesn't just show roads but dragons lurking at the edges of the known world, or celestial paths guiding sailors by the stars long before GPS existed. Ancient maps were more than navigation tools. They were expressions of how people saw their place in the universe. Some were startlingly accurate, while others mixed reality with pure imagination, revealing fears, dreams, and uncharted mysteries. Why did a 14th century map mark Antarctica centuries before it was officially discovered? How did a Babylonian clay tablet from 600 BCE sketch the world with eerie precision? The answers lie in these artifacts, waiting to pull us into their stories. This journey isn't just about ink on parchment or carvings in stone. It's about the human urge to explore, to make sense of the unknown, even when that meant filling blank spaces with legends. From medieval Mappa Mundi bursting with religious symbolism to Chinese silk maps plotting trade routes through dangerous terrain, each one opens a window into the minds of the people who made them. By the end of this video, you'll see these maps not as static drawings but as living conversations across time. So let's begin, because history's greatest mysteries are often hidden in plain sight. The Babylonian World Map, carved into a clay tablet around 600 BCE, is the oldest surviving attempt to capture the entire known world, but it's nothing like the maps we use today. Instead of coastlines and mountain ranges, it shows Babylon at the center, wrapped by a ring of bitter water representing the cosmic ocean. Beyond that, mystical islands and distant regions labeled simply "where the sun is not seen." This wasn't a tool for travelers, it was a visual manifesto of Mesopotamian belief, where the earth floated like a disk on an endless sea, and the heavens arched above like a solid dome. What's fascinating is how the map blends geography with mythology. The Euphrates River slices through Babylon's heart, just as it did in reality. But then the map veers into the symbolic, with triangles marking Assyria and other lands not by their shapes but as abstract concepts. Some scholars think those outer circles might even represent the Babylonian creation myth, where the god Marduk slays chaos to form the world from its corpse. Imagine holding this tablet 3,000 years ago, running your fingers over its grooves and feeling like you held the universe in your hands. And yet, for all its poetic leaps, the map holds eerie glimmers of real knowledge. The positions of key cities like Susa and are roughly correct, hinting at trade routes or military campaigns burned into memory long before cartography became a science. It's a reminder that even our oldest ancestors hungered to make sense of their world, not just by measuring it, but by weaving it into stories that gave meaning to the unknown. The next time you glance at a digital map with its pin-sharp accuracy, spare a thought for that Babylonian scribe, pressing lines into clay to ask the same question we still do: where do we stand in the grand scheme of things? Claudius Ptolemy's world map, crafted in the 2nd century CE, was a revolution wrapped in parchment, a masterpiece that fused mathematics with geography in ways no one had attempted before. Unlike the Babylonians, who wove myth into their clay tablets, Ptolemy aimed for precision, plotting the known world using grids of longitude and latitude. His work, the Geographia, wasn't just a map, it was a manual for how to think about space, instructing future generations to measure the Earth in degrees rather than legends. Yet for all its innovation, Ptolemy's map was far from perfect. He underestimated the planet's size, squeezing Europe and Asia into a space far too small, and he imagined the Indian Ocean as a landlocked sea, a mistake that would haunt explorers for centuries. When Columbus set sail in 1492, he carried Ptolemy's miscalculations in his mind, convinced Asia lay just beyond the horizon. That's the irony. The very map that advanced cartography also led sailors astray, proving even genius can be shackled by the limits of its time. What's remarkable is how long Ptolemy's ideas endured. For over 1,000 years, his grid system was the gold standard, copied and debated from Baghdad to Byzantium. Medieval scholars pored over his coordinates, and Renaissance mapmakers resurrected his work, blending his ancient calculations with new discoveries. Look closely at those later maps, and you'll see Ptolemy's ghost, his meridians curving across parchment, his errors stubbornly clinging to the margins. His legacy wasn't just in getting things right, it was in teaching the world to ask how we get things right. The map also reveals a tantalizing glimpse of lost knowledge. Ptolemy referenced ancient sources like the Library of Alexandria, hinting at advanced geography that vanished when the library burned. Some of his coordinates align eerily well with modern measurements, suggesting he had access to data we'll never recover. It's a reminder that history isn't a straight line of progress. Sometimes the brightest lights flicker out, leaving later generations to rediscover what was once known. So why does Ptolemy's map still captivate us? Perhaps because it's a mirror of human ambition, brilliant, flawed, and endlessly influential. It's not just a relic of the past, it's a foundation stone of the modern world, hidden in the lines of every GPS grid we use today. The next time your phone pinpoints your location, remember, you're standing on the shoulders of a second-century visionary who dared to grid the Earth. The Peutinger table is the ancient Roman equivalent of a modern-day highway atlas if that atlas was stretched, twisted, and packed onto a single scroll the length of a banquet table. This extraordinary document, likely copied in the 13th century from a 4th century original, compresses the entire Roman Empire into a bizarre, elongated strip that sprawls over 22 feet long but barely a foot tall. Britain squats at one end, India at the other, and between them, Rome's vast network of roads unfolds like a flattened subway map, prioritizing connectivity over accuracy. At first glance, the distortion seems outrageous. The Mediterranean Sea shrinks to a thin ribbon, and entire mountain ranges vanish. But this wasn't a failure of cartography, it was a stroke of practicality. The Peutinger table wasn't meant to show landscapes or distances to scale. Instead, it functioned as a visual itinerary, marking every rest stop, bathhouse, and horse-changing station along Rome's highways. Need to travel from Lugdunum in Gaul to Constantinople? The map's red lines would guide you town by town, with small symbols indicating where to find fresh water or pay tolls. Think of it as an ancient GPS stripped down to the essentials, no terrain, just turn-by-turn directions. The scroll's format reveals another layer of Roman ingenuity. By stretching the empire horizontally, the mapmaker could fit the entire road network onto a portable roll, perfect for officials, merchants, or soldiers on the move. Cities bulge along the routes like beads on a string, their size reflecting importance rather than physical scale. Rome, of course, looms largest, crowned by a grand illustration of the imperial capital. But look closely, and you'll spot whimsical details: a lighthouse near Alexandria, a tent marking a military camp in Persia, that transformed the map from a utility into a storytelling artifact. Yet mysteries linger. Why include India, which Rome never fully controlled? Some scholars argue it reflects trade ambitions, while others see echoes of Alexander the Great's legendary marches. And then there's the eerie omission. The Peutinger table shows no oceans, no edges. The known world simply trails off, as if the roads might continue forever. Perhaps that's the map's quiet revelation, not just how Romans traveled, but how they dreamed. To unroll this scroll was to trace the sinews of an empire that believed, if only for a moment, its reach might never end. What makes the Peutinger table unforgettable isn't its accuracy, but its audacity. It rejects the very idea that maps must mirror reality, instead bending geography to serve human need. In that sense, it's startlingly modern. Today's subway maps do the same, warping space for clarity. The next time you glance at one, remember, 2,000 years ago, a Roman bureaucrat unfurled a leather scroll and saw the world not as it was, but as it could be used. The Hereford Mappa Mundi isn't just a map, it's a medieval masterpiece where geography bends to the will of faith. Created around 1300 CE and stretching over 5 feet of calfskin, this sprawling work places Jerusalem dead center, not because it was the most convenient travel hub, but because it was the spiritual heart of the Christian world. Rivers flow like spokes from this holy axis, and continents warp in size to fit a divine hierarchy, with Europe and Asia dwarfing Africa. Forget scale or accuracy. Every inch of this map pulses with symbolism, turning the earth into a sermon painted on parchment. At first glance, the Hereford map feels like stepping into a medieval monk's imagination. Biblical scenes crowd the margins. Adam and Eve huddle near paradise. Christ presides over the Last Judgment, and the Tower of Babel pierces the sky. But the real wonders lie at the edges, where the known world dissolves into myth. Here, dragons coil around caves, dog-headed men gnaw bones, and the monstrous Blemi tribe of headless humans with faces on their chests lurk in the shadows. These weren't decorative flourishes, they were warnings. Beyond Christendom lay chaos, a literal no-man's land where faith frayed and monsters ruled. The map didn't just chart lands, it mapped the battle between salvation and sin. What's striking is how deliberately geography takes a backseat to theology. The Nile curves unnaturally eastward, not because the cartographer was ignorant, but to align it with biblical tradition where the river flowed from paradise. Even the Red Sea shines bright scarlet, a visual cue to the parting of waters for Moses. Cities aren't placed for navigation, they're stations in a sacred story. Rome, seat of the Pope, looms large, while secular powerhouses like London shrink to dots. This was a map meant to be read, not traveled, its layers of ink acting as a visual Bible for the illiterate masses. Yet beneath the allegory, traces of real-world knowledge peek through. Scholars think the map borrowed from Roman road surveys, and some coastal outlines vaguely match reality. Even the monsters weren't pure fantasy. Travelers' tales of strange races in distant lands trickled into medieval lore, blending rumor with revelation. The Hereford Mappa Mundi straddles two worlds, one where faith dictated truth, and another where the earth's mysteries tugged at the edges of dogma. Why does this map still fascinate? Because it captures a moment when the world felt both vast and knowable, provided you viewed it through the lens of belief. Modern maps prioritize precision, but the Hereford reminds us that every culture maps not just what is, but what matters. Unroll this calfskin today, and you're not just seeing the past, you're seeing how an entire civilization made sense of existence, one sacred line at a time. The Gangnedo map, painted on silk in Korea in 1402, is a quiet revolution disguised as geography. At a time when most East Asian maps focused tightly on China and its neighbors, this sprawling work stretches all the way to Africa and Europe, lands most Koreans had never seen. But this wasn't just about exploration, it was a calculated display of power. Commissioned during the Joseon dynasty, the map announced Korea's intellectual reach, weaving together Chinese grid systems, Islamic sailing charts, and Korean artistic flair into a single, audacious statement. We may not rule the world, but we understand it better than anyone. What makes the Gangnedo so groundbreaking is its hybrid DNA. Chinese maps of the era typically framed the Middle Kingdom as the literal center of civilization, with foreign lands shrinking into insignificance. But here, Africa bulges with surprising accuracy along the left edge. its northern coast tracing the Mediterranean almost correctly likely borrowed from Arab traders' knowledge. Europe crouches in the upper left, crudely drawn but undeniably present, with rivers like the Danube faintly visible. Even more startling, the map shows the Arabian Peninsula and the Red Sea with clarity, hinting at a flow of information along the Silk Road that most textbooks overlook. Yet the Kangnido isn't just a patchwork of borrowed ideas. Korea's cartographers made deliberate tweaks to serve their kingdom's pride. China still dominates the center, but the Korean peninsula is rendered larger than reality, its rivers and mountain ranges etched with loving detail. Japan, often minimized in Chinese maps, appears prominently to the east, a nod to Korea's diplomatic ties. Even the map's colors whisper politics. Gold ink highlights Korean territory, while foreign lands fade into muted blues and greens. This wasn't neutral cartography, it was soft power painted on silk. The map's purpose becomes clearer when you consider the chaos of its time. The Ming dynasty had recently overthrown the Mongols, and Korea was asserting itself as a cultured, independent state. By showcasing knowledge of distant continents, the Joseon court sent a message to rivals: we're no backwater. Scholars suspect the Kangnido was displayed during diplomatic receptions, where visiting envoys would have marveled at its breadth and, by extension, Korea's sophistication. But the Kangnido's true magic lies in its contradictions. For all its political posturing, it's also strangely humble. The map admits gaps in knowledge. Southern Africa dissolves into sketchy lines, and some European cities are mislabeled. Unlike Western maps that filled blanks with monsters, the Kangnido leaves mysteries blank, a rare acknowledgement of the limits of understanding. In that sense, it's more honest than many modern maps which pretend to omniscience with satellite precision. Today, the Kangnido feels like a bridge between worlds. It captures a moment when Asia's scholars were more globally connected than we often assume, trading knowledge across deserts and oceans. And it reminds us that every map, no matter how beautiful, is ultimately an argument about who matters, who knows, and who gets to define the shape of the world. Unroll this silk scroll, and you're not just seeing continents, you're seeing a kingdom's ambition stitched into the very fabric of the earth. The Vinland Map ignited a firestorm in the world of cartography when it surfaced in the 1950s, a fragile parchment claiming to rewrite history. Purportedly drawn in the 15th century, its most explosive feature is a jagged coastline west of Greenland labeled Vinland, a name matching Norse sagas that describe Leif Erikson's settlements in North America centuries before Columbus. If authentic, this map would be the oldest known depiction of the New World, a smoking gun proving Viking voyages reached America long before other Europeans. But from the moment it appeared, the map's backstory felt too perfect, as if someone had tailored it to fit modern fantasies of pre-Columbian discovery. Scientific scrutiny only deepened the mystery. Early tests in the 1960s revealed traces of anatase, a rare titanium compound in the ink, which skeptics argued couldn't have existed in medieval pigments. Defenders countered that anatase might occur naturally or result from aging, but the debate grew fiercer in 2018 when high-resolution scans showed the ink's chemical signature matched 20th century formulations. The parchment itself, carbon-dated to the 1400s, seemed genuine, but ink can be added later. Then came the handwriting analysis. The map's Latin script included phrases like Vinland Insula that felt suspiciously modern, as if the forger had cribbed from 20th century translations of Viking sagas. Scholars remain sharply divided. Some point to the map's accurate portrayal of Greenland's coastline, knowledge unlikely for a 15th century European unless drawing from Norse sources. Others highlight glaring errors like Iceland's misplaced position or the bizarrely elongated shape of Europe, suggesting a clever hoaxer with patchy historical knowledge. The map's provenance doesn't help. It appeared mysteriously in a Spanish bookdealer's hands with no chain of ownership before 1957, a red flag for historians. What makes the Vinland Map so tantalizing isn't just its potential to upend textbooks. It's a Rorschach test for how we handle historical ambiguity. True believers see a lost Viking masterpiece, while skeptics spot an elegant fraud capitalizing on mid-century fascination with Norse heroes. Even the stakes are contested. If real, the map would confirm widespread medieval knowledge of America. If fake, it exposes how easily we project our desires onto the past. Perhaps the most telling detail lies in the margins. Faint lines suggest an earlier, unrelated sketch was scrubbed away to make room for the Vinland legend, as if the map's true history is literally written beneath the surface. Until technology or new evidence cracks the case, this parchment remains history's most beguiling maybe. It doesn't just ask, did Vikings map America? It asks a harder question: how much are we willing to believe when the past refuses to give straight answers? The Piri-Reis map of 1513 is the kind of artifact that makes historians and conspiracy theorists lean in close, squinting for clues. Drawn by the Ottoman admiral Piri-Reis, this fragment, only a sixth of the original survives, shows the Atlantic coastlines of Europe, Africa, and the Americas with uncanny precision. But what sets pulses racing is the squiggle at the bottom, labeled Antarctica, a continent not officially discovered for another 300 years. Even stranger. The landmass appears ice-free, with rivers and mountains as if copied from a source that saw the continent before it was buried under glaciers. How could a 16th-century Ottoman cartographer depict a land hidden under millennia of ice? One theory points to ancient sources. Piri-Reis himself wrote that he compiled the map from older charts, including some dating back to Alexander the Great's era. Could he have accessed a lost library of pre-glacial knowledge? Advocates of this idea, like author Charles Hapgood, argue that advanced civilizations might have mapped Antarctica when its coasts were still exposed, roughly 6,000 years ago. Others propose the map reflects vague sailors' tales of a southern land, blended with educated guesswork. Skeptics counter that the Antarctica shape might actually be South America's eastern bulge, distorted by the map's unusual projection. The debate gets thornier when you examine the details. The map's rendering of the Andes matches poorly with reality, but the coastline some claim as Antarctica's Queen Maud Land aligns eerily well with modern seismic surveys of the continent's subglacial topography. Even NASA has waffled on the topic. In the 1960s, their aerial surveys noted similarities but stopped short of endorsing ancient origins. The truth may lie in the messy process of map-making itself. Piri-Reis was a synthesizer, stitching together Portuguese, Arab, and Mediterranean charts, some accurate, some speculative. His genius wasn't in flawless geography, but in weaving disparate threads into a tapestry that felt true. What keeps this map in the spotlight isn't just its potential secrets, it's how it mirrors our own obsessions. We long for evidence of forgotten worlds, of knowledge lost to time. The Piri-Reis map offers just enough ambiguity to fuel that hunger. Whether it's a snapshot of prehistoric science or a lucky coincidence, it challenges us to ask, how much did the ancients really know, and how much have we yet to rediscover? The Cantino planisphere is the stuff of espionage legends. A map so valuable it was smuggled out of Portugal under the noses of its own king. Created in 1502 by an anonymous cartographer, this stunning parchment wasn't just a navigation tool. It was a stolen snapshot of the world's greatest secrets, revealing coastlines so sensitive that Portugal guarded them like state secrets. At its heart lay Brazil, freshly claimed by the Portuguese but not yet common knowledge in Europe. The map's very existence was an act of geopolitical theft, commissioned by an Italian spy named Alberto Cantino, who paid a fortune to whisk it to his patrons in Italy. Overnight, it became the ultimate insider trading tip, proof that Portugal had struck gold in the New World. What makes the Cantino planisphere revolutionary isn't just its accuracy, but its audacious detail. For the first time, Brazil's bulging coastline appears with startling clarity, traced by explorers like Pedro Alves Cabral just 2 years earlier. The map even hints at the Amazon's mouth, labeled vaguely as Land of Parrots, a nod to the vibrant birds Portuguese sailors brought back as proof of their find. But Brazil was just the headline. The map's real treasure was its exhaustive charting of West Africa and the Indian Ocean, peppered with trading posts and spice routes Portugal had monopolized. Every harbor, every current, every monsoon pattern was a breadcrumb leading to unimaginable wealth. This wasn't just cartography, it was corporate warfare. Portugal and Spain had carved up the world with the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494, drawing a line down the Atlantic to split their colonial ambitions. The Cantino planisphere exposed how well Portugal was exploiting its side, from African gold to Indian pepper. When the Duke of Ferrara, Cantino's employer, unrolled this parchment, he wasn't just seeing geography, he was seeing profit margins. The map's precision threatened Portugal's monopoly, sparking a scramble among rivals to copy its routes. Within years, knockoffs circulated in Venice and Genoa, undercutting Lisbon's control. Yet the map's brilliance lies in its contradictions. While it's remarkably accurate for Brazil and Africa, it skews wildly elsewhere. The Caribbean is compressed and Asia's edges dissolve into fantasy, suggesting the Portuguese were still piecing together the puzzle. Even the compass lines curve unnaturally, a deliberate distortion, some argue, to mislead spies who might steal the map. The Cantino planisphere is both a masterpiece and a hall of mirrors, blending truth with strategic lies. Why does this stolen map still captivate us? Because it captures the moment geography became power. In an age when knowledge of a single coastline could make or break empires, the Cantino planisphere was the original leaker, a WikiLeaks dump on parchment. It reminds us that every map is a living document, shaped not just by ink but by greed, intrigue, and the relentless human urge to own the unknown. Hold up a digital map today and it's just pixels. But hold up the Cantino planisphere and you're holding the blueprint of a world remade one smuggled secret at a time. The Waldseemüller map of 1507 isn't just a landmark in cartography, it's a cosmic accident that reshaped the world's identity. Printed in Germany by a little-known monk named Martin Waldseemüller, this towering 12-panel map did something unprecedented. It slapped the name America across the southern continent, a bold tribute to Florentine explorer Amerigo Vespucci. The irony, Vespucci never even set foot on the landmass that now bears his name, and Waldseemüller himself later regretted the choice. Yet thanks to this single sheet of paper, half the planet would forever carry a misattributed moniker. What's fascinating is how the mistake happened. Vespucci's vivid accounts of his voyages to South America, published as Mundus Novus, electrified Europe with tales of a new world far wilder than Columbus's reports. Waldseemüller, dazzled by these stories, assumed Vespucci was the true discoverer. So when he drafted his map, he etched America in elegant script across what we now call Brazil, following the convention of naming lands after explorers like Colombia for Columbus. But here's the twist: Columbus still believed he'd reached Asia, while Vespucci openly called it a new continent. Waldseemüller was making a philosophical statement, not just a geographical one. He was picking sides in the era's hottest debate. The map's audacity didn't stop there. It was the first to show the Pacific Ocean as a separate body of water, decades before Balboa discovered it, suggesting Waldseemüller had access to secret Portuguese charts or simply made an educated guess. Even more startling, North America floats disconnected from its southern counterpart, with a sea route plotted between them, a hypothetical passage to Asia that would haunt explorers for centuries. This wasn't just a map, it was a vision board for the age of exploration, stitched together from rumor, hope, and fragments of truth. Yet history loves a plot twist. By 1513, Waldseemüller had second thoughts. New evidence confirmed Columbus's earlier voyages, prompting him to remove America from his updated maps. But it was too late. The original had already spread like wildfire through Europe's printing shops, copied by cartographers who cared more for catchy labels than historical justice. The name stuck, proving how easily ink can outpace facts. Why does this map still matter? Because it captures the messy birth of global consciousness. Waldseemüller didn't just misname a continent, he crystallized the moment Europe realized the world was vaster and stranger than anyone dreamed. Every time we say America, we're whispering the echo of a monk's best guess, a reminder that history isn't written by the victors, but by the mapmakers who dared to fill in the blanks. The Selden map shatters every stereotype of Ming Dynasty cartography. While most Chinese maps of the 16th century fixated on celestial harmony or imperial borders, this sprawling ink and color masterpiece painted on paper nearly 5 feet wide pivots its gaze seaward, charting the bustling trade routes from Fujian to Java with the precision of a merchant's ledger. Discovered in the basement of Oxford's Bodleian Library in 2008, its water-stained edges hid a revelation. Here was a working tool, not a philosophical statement, plotting winds, ports, and shipping lanes with ruthless practicality. What sets the Selden map apart is its mercantile heartbeat. Instead of centering on the Forbidden City, it pivots around the South China Sea, that liquid highway where Chinese junks, Portuguese carracks, and Arab dhows crisscrossed. Dozens of ports bulge along the coasts, each labeled with names like Malacca and Hoi and in meticulous Chinese script, their size reflecting commercial importance rather than political power. Thin red lines spider outward, tracing optimal sailing routes between them, some following monsoon patterns known only to seasoned captains. Even the compass roses tilt at odd angles, capturing magnetic variations crucial for navigation. This wasn't art, it was a business blueprint likely commissioned by a Fujianese trading guild to outsail competitors. The map's realism is startling. Coral reefs cluster as jagged shapes near Borneo, while depth soundings dot the Gulf of Tonkin, details absent from court-approved maps. Scholars suspect its anonymous creator interviewed sailors, compiling first-hand accounts into a collage of lived experience. One telling quirk, Japan appears as a smudged afterthought, barely sketched compared to the vibrant detail lavished on Southeast Asia. Why? Because for Fujian's pepper and porcelain traders, Japan was a backwater. The real money flowed south. Yet the Selden map's brilliance hides a puzzle. Carbon dating places it around 1609, just as Ming China was slamming its doors to foreign trade. The government burned ocean-going ships and banned private commerce, retreating into isolation. So why does this map scream globalism? Some historians think it represents a defiant underground evidence that Chinese merchants kept navigating the wider world despite imperial decrees. The very existence of such a detailed maritime chart suggests smuggling networks thrived, their knowledge too valuable to erase. The map's afterlife adds another layer of intrigue. How did it end up in England? The trail points to John Selden, a 17th-century lawyer who amassed Oriental manuscripts, possibly acquiring it from Dutch traders. For centuries, it gathered dust, its significance overlooked until modern imaging techniques revealed hidden annotations, penciled calculations in Malay, perhaps notes from a ship's navigator. This single sheet of paper thus bridges 3 worlds: Chinese pragmatism, Southeast Asian exchange, and European curiosity. What makes the Selden map unforgettable isn't just its geography, but its subversion. In an era when maps served kings and priests, this one spoke the language of dockworkers and spice dealers. It reminds us that history's grand narratives often ignore the quiet rebels, the merchants who kept sailing, mapping, and connecting cultures even when empires said no. Unfurl this stained parchment today, and you'll hear the creak of wooden hulls and the haggle of market stalls, a testament to the unsung hands that truly shaped our world. The Borgia map, crafted in the 15th century, is where geography and theology collide in a kaleidoscope of ink and gold. Unlike the practical sea charts of its time, this European masterpiece, painted on oxhide, stitches together real coastlines with realms straight out of scripture. Jerusalem anchors the center as expected, but trace your finger eastward and suddenly you're in paradise. The Garden of Eden blooms in vivid pigment, guarded by a fiery angel and fed by 4 rivers spilling from its heart. Here, the Tigris and Euphrates don't just flow through Mesopotamia. They branch from divine springs, turning the map into a theological blueprint where earthly and heavenly geography intertwine. What's striking is how casually the Borgia map blurs the line between exploration and myth. The Mediterranean coasts mirror contemporary Portolan charts with surprising accuracy, yet just beyond the Black Sea, the realm of Prester John shimmers into view, a Christian kingdom medieval Europeans believed thrived in isolation, awaiting alliance against Islam. Further east, the Caspian Sea curves incorrectly into a perfect circle, not from ignorance but because ancient texts like Pliny's Natural History insisted it was round. This wasn't bad cartography, it was scholarship in ink where classical authority outweighed eyewitness accounts. The map's true genius lies in its layering of time. Near Eden, a tiny Adam and Eve huddle under the tree of knowledge, while across the Red Sea painted literal crimson, Moses parts the waters in a pocket of biblical time. Meanwhile, contemporary cities like Venice and Genoa dot the Italian coast, their wealth etched in gilded towers. The Borgia map doesn't just show the world, it collapses past and present into a single, sacred narrative, suggesting that every discovery, no matter how new, was merely revisiting God's original blueprint. Yet for all its mysticism, the map betrays creeping curiosity about the world beyond dogma. Africa's west coast stretches farther south than on earlier works, hinting at Portuguese voyages that would soon shatter old myths. Even Eden isn't placed at the edge as tradition demanded, but wedged into Asia, an awkward compromise between legend and mounting geographical evidence. You can almost see the mapmaker's quill trembling between faith and fact. Why does this oxhide canvas still fascinate? Because it captures a hinge moment in history when the world was both expanding and shrinking. Unroll the Borgia map and you're witnessing the last gasp of medieval certainty, the final maps where dragons and saints could share space with real rivers before science tore paradise off the page. It's a testament not to what Europeans knew, but what they dared to dream while standing on the brink of a world they couldn't yet imagine. The Zeno map arrives like a ghost from 2 different centuries at once, a parchment published in 1558 that claims to redraw a voyage from the late 1300s. According to its accompanying text, the map traces the journeys of Venetian brothers Niccolo and Antonio Zeno, who allegedly sailed with a mysterious prince named Zichmni to the North Atlantic, reaching lands that look suspiciously like Greenland and even North America. If true, it would mean Venetians beat Columbus by nearly 100 years, but from the moment it surfaced, the map has been shadowed by accusations of forgery, leaving historians to pick apart whether it's a medieval time capsule or a Renaissance con job. Start with the map's tantalizing details. The North Atlantic sprawls across the page with place names like Drogeo and Estatiland. Landmarks some argue match Newfoundland and Labrador. The shapes are crude, but Greenland appears as a long, thin island called Engronland, a plausible distortion of Norse descriptions. The Zeno brothers' own notes describe encounters with indigenous people and a volcanic eruption, details that feel too vivid to invent. Supporters of the map's authenticity point to these echoes of real geography, suggesting the Zenos might have joined a Norse expedition, perhaps led by the semi-legendary Scottish nobleman Henry Sinclair, who some believe reached Nova Scotia in the late 14th century. But the skeptics strike back hard. The map style screams mid-16th century, not the late Middle Ages. Its compass, roses, and lettering align with other works from the 1500s. Even more damning, the text accompanying the map was written by a descendant, Niccolo Zeno the Younger, who admitted to reconstructing the original from fragments. Critics argue he fabricated the entire tale to boost his family's prestige during an era when claiming New World discoveries was a national obsession. The clincher for many is the map's inclusion of Friesland, a phantom island that appears on other Renaissance maps but has no basis in Norse or Venetian records. If the Xenos truly sailed these waters, why include a fantasy? Yet the debate gets murkier when you dig into the nuances. Some scholars propose a middle path, that the younger Zeno did have genuine family documents but embellished them with contemporary geographic guesses. Carbon dating of the parchment hasn't settled the matter. While the material could be medieval, the ink and text might be later additions. Even the volcanic eruption described could refer to Iceland's Eldgjá, a real event Norse chroniclers documented. The Zeno map might be a pastiche, part memory, part invention, like a Renaissance fanfic blending fact and folklore. What makes this map unforgettable isn't just the question of its truth, but what it reveals about the chaos of early cartography. In an age when every explorer's tale was filtered through scribes, translators, and proud relatives, maps were less about accuracy than about stitching together prestige and plausibility. The Zeno map, whether hoax or half-truth, is a Rorschach test for how we navigate history's gray zones. Sometimes the most intriguing maps aren't the ones that guide us, but the ones that lead us deeper into the fog. The Buach map of 1737 sits at the crossroads of mystery and method, an 18th-century French cartographer's attempt to chart a continent no European had yet seen. Philippe Buach, a geographer renowned for his theoretical precision, didn't just sketch Antarctica as a blank void. He drew it as a distinct landmass split by a sinuous channel, dividing it into two icy lobes. The strangest part, his map predates the official discovery of Antarctica by nearly a century. Was Buach working from lost sources that glimpsed the frozen south before history recorded it, or was this an elaborate guess dressed as science? Buach's approach was anything but reckless. A disciple of rigorous geography, he built his map on accounts from explorers like Abel Tasman and theoretical land bridges he believed connected continents. His Antarctica wasn't a wild doodle but a calculated hypothesis, proposing that southern landmasses mirrored northern ones for planetary balance, the channel bisecting the continent. He argued it aligned with the Straits of Bering and Gibraltar, part of a symmetrical global system. While modern science dismisses such symmetry, Buach's logic was rooted in the Enlightenment's love for orderly patterns, a cosmic jigsaw where every piece had its place. Yet the map's eerie accuracy keeps the debate alive. The supposed channel loosely mirrors the actual transantarctic mountain range, which divides East and West Antarctica. Some fringe theorists, like Charles Hapgood, argue Buach accessed ancient charts passed down from seafaring cultures, perhaps Phoenicians or Polynesians, who might have glimpsed ice-free coasts during warmer climatic periods. Others point to the 16th century Orontius Phineus map, which also depicts a southern continent with startling detail, as potential inspiration. But mainstream scholars counter that Buach's Antarctica crumbles under scrutiny. His landmass floats too far north, and his central channel aligns poorly with real geology. The truth might lie in Buach's own sources. He reportedly studied logs from Dutch and Spanish voyages that spoke of high icebergs and rocky shores far south of Cape Horn. These fragmented accounts, mixed with his theoretical leanings, could have sparked a visionary if flawed reconstruction. It's also possible he borrowed from unverified charts circulating among European maritime circles, where sailors' tall tales blended with hard-won data. What makes the Buach map unforgettable isn't just its potential secrets, but what it reveals about the dance between knowledge and imagination. Even the most disciplined minds fill gaps with speculation, and sometimes those guesses stumble into uncanny truth. Whether Buach pieced together forgotten clues or simply got lucky, his map stands as a testament to humanity's relentless drive to map the unseen, even when the unseen fights to stay hidden. At first glance, the Tabula Rogeriana shouldn't have existed. Crafted in 1154 for the Norman King Roger II of Sicily, this colossal Islamic world map was born from an impossible collaboration. A Muslim scholar, al-Idrisi, working under Christian patronage to synthesize centuries of Arab, Greek, and Persian geography into a single masterpiece. While medieval European maps were busy squeezing the earth into biblical symbolism, al-Idrisi's work sprawled across 36 detailed sheets, plotting cities, rivers, and trade routes with a precision that wouldn't be matched for another 300 years. This wasn't just a map, it was a revolution in how to see the world, built not on dogma but on the accumulated wisdom of merchants, astronomers, and travelers who'd crossed deserts and oceans long before Marco Polo. What set the Tabula Rogeriana apart was its ruthless commitment to empirical truth. Al-Idrisi and his team spent 15 years grilling sailors and caravaneers at Roger's cosmopolitan court in Palermo, cross-referencing their stories with astronomical tables and older texts. The result, coastlines from Spain to Korea bent into shapes startlingly close to reality, with the Nile's delta branching just as it does in modern satellite images. Even the map's orientation was radical, unlike European Christian maps which placed east at the top for Eden, or Arab Qibla maps aligned toward Mecca. Al-Idrisi flipped convention and put south on top, not for symbolism, but because it better organized the data flowing from sub-Saharan trade routes. Every inch of parchment whispered the same message: geography should serve knowledge, not ideology. The contrast with contemporaneous European maps couldn't be starker. Where the Hereford Mappa Mundi crammed the world into a divine morality play, the Tabula Rogeriana treated the Earth as a measurable, knowable space. Take its treatment of Africa. While European cartographers sketched vague blobs labeled with monsters, al-Idrisi marked Timbuktu as a hub of gold and learning, and traced the Niger River's curve, details gleaned from trans-Saharan traders. His Mediterranean ports bristled with practical notes about anchor depths and market goods, while his Asia, though still partly speculative, acknowledged the Silk Road's complexity rather than reducing it to a biblical exile route. Yet for all its scientific rigor, the map wasn't sterile. Al-Idrisi wove in tales from his sources, like the Moroccan merchant who described coconut palms bending over Zanzibar's beaches, or the Persian navigator who warned of whirlpools near Sicily's straits. These vignettes transformed the tabula from a dry atlas into a living document, capturing the hum of human movement and memory. Even its errors were instructive. Sri Lanka ballooned to twice its size, likely because Arab sailors talked up its pearl wealth, while Scandinavia shrank into obscurity, reflecting the limits of Islamic trade networks. Honest mistakes, not mythical insertions, the map's legacy is as fragmented as its surviving copies. Crusaders and Mongols would soon redraw the world al-Idrisi had meticulously documented, and his original silver planisphere, said to weigh over 300 pounds, vanished into history. But the Tabula Rogeriana's spirit endured in unexpected ways. Centuries later, when Portuguese explorers like Vasco da Gama set sail for India, they carried charts derived from Arab models, inheritors of the same tradition that had once placed truth above tradition. It's a quiet reminder that the borders between cultures are often as porous as those on maps, and that progress, when it comes, leans on the shoulders of those who dared to see the world as it was, not as they wished it to be. The Turin papyrus map shatters the myth that ancient Egyptians only drew symbolic landscapes. This fragile sheet of papyrus, dating back to around 1150 BCE, is the world's oldest surviving topographic map, and it was as practical as a modern hiking guide. Created for Ramses IV's quarrying expeditions to the Wadi Hammamat, it charts a stretch of the eastern desert with meticulous attention to terrain. Jagged peaks rise in brown ink, dry riverbeds snake through the parchment, and even the quality of the stone quarries is noted in hieratic script. This wasn't a ceremonial object, It was a working tool carried by scribes and foremen to navigate the blistering wastelands where pharaohs sourced the granite for their statues and sarcophagi. What's astonishing is how modern the map feels. Unlike the symbolic realms of Babylonian or medieval cartography, the Turin papyrus focuses on actionable details. Distances between waypoints are marked in precise Itru, ancient Egyptian miles, and the map's orientation rotates dynamically following the winding path of the expedition rather than locking to cardinal directions. Spots where water could be found are labeled with red dots, life-saving intel in a desert where one wrong turn meant death. The map even flags a particularly rich vein of Beckhan stone, the prized green-gray rock used for royal coffins, with a note that translates roughly to good quality here. Imagine a team of laborers and soldiers unfolding this fragile scroll under the desert sun, tracing their fingers along inked wadis to plan the next day's march. But the map's brilliance hides a darker story. Ramses IV's reign was plagued by resource shortages, and his frantic quarrying missions documented in other papyri reveal a kingdom scrambling to maintain its grandeur. The Turin map's urgency is palpable. Every hill and well matters because failure meant no stone for the pharaoh's monuments, no legacy carved in rock. Scholars suspect it was part of a larger set, now lost, that plotted routes to gold mines and turquoise deposits. These weren't treasure maps, they were bureaucratic records, the spreadsheets of empire building. Yet for all its pragmatism, the map isn't devoid of artistry. The peaks are rendered with subtle shading, and the hieratic script curls like desert wind over the landscape. Even the papyrus itself was recycled. Infrared scans reveal older tax records beneath the ink, a frugal touch that makes the map feel human. It's this blend of beauty and utility that makes the Turin papyrus so revealing. While later cultures mapped to glorify gods or kings, the Egyptians, when it counted, mapped to work. The map's survival is its own miracle. Found crumpled in a Theban tomb and later housed in a Turin museum, it was initially mistaken for a ritual text until scholars pieced together its true purpose. Today, it offers a rare glimpse into the unglamorous machinery of empire, the sweat and logistics behind the pyramids and obelisks. Unroll this papyrus, and you're not just seeing a map. You're holding the to-do list of a civilization that knew the weight of every stone, the cost of every mile, and the relentless precision it took to carve immortality from the desert. The Da Ming Honey, too, isn't just a map. It's a declaration of power painted on silk. Created during the Ming dynasty in the late 14th century, this sprawling masterpiece stretches over 12 feet, stitching together Chinese and Islamic cartography into a single vision of empire. At first glance, it looks like a typical imperial map, with China dominating the center like the sun in a celestial orbit. But zoom in, and you'll spot something extraordinary. The world doesn't end at the Middle Kingdom's borders. Arabia curls into view near the western edge, its cities labeled in meticulous Chinese script, while Africa's Horn juts southward with surprising accuracy. This wasn't just vanity, it was propaganda disguised as geography, a silent assertion that the Ming emperors ruled not just a country, but a cosmos. What makes the Da Ming Honey too revolutionary is its hybrid DNA. Chinese maps traditionally framed the world as concentric rings of civilization radiating from the sun of heaven, with barbarians fading into obscurity at the edges. But here, Islamic knowledge, likely smuggled into Nanjing by Arab traders or captured Mongol scholars, infects the parchment. The Indian Ocean mirrors Arab sailing charts, its monsoon winds hinted at with delicate brushstrokes. Even the scale bends to accommodate distant lands. Europe crouches in the upper left, shrunk but undeniably present, while Java and Sumatra balloon with the exaggerated importance of thriving Ming tributaries. This was no provincial sketch, it was a flex proof that Ming China could digest the entire known world and spit it back out on its own terms. The map's political agenda is impossible to miss. Every line throbs with the energy of the early Ming dynasty, fresh from expelling the Mongol Yuan rulers. Emperor Hongwu needed to legitimize his fractured realm, and what better way than to depict it as the undisputed hub of global order? Tributary states like Korea and Vietnam bow inward toward China, their names written with the same reverence as provincial capitals. Meanwhile, the Great Wall snakes across the north, a freshly reinforced scar marking the boundary between civilization and chaos. Even the color scheme whispers dominance. Ming territory glows in warm yellows and reds, while foreign lands fade into cool blues as if the earth itself acknowledged China's primacy. Yet for all its bravado, the map betrays a creeping anxiety. Look closely at the maritime routes fanning out from Fujian. They're dotted with tiny ships tracing Zheng He's soon-to-be legendary voyages. These inked vessels hint at a paradox. The Ming craved global recognition but feared the contamination of the outside world. Within decades, the court would ban ocean-going expeditions and burn its treasure fleet's records, retreating into isolation. The Daming honey, too, thus freezes a fleeting moment caught between swaggering openness and defensive paranoia. It's a map that both celebrates and inadvertently mourns the brief window when China might have ruled the waves. The most haunting detail lies in the margins. Beyond the orderly grids of Chinese provinces, the edges of the known world dissolve into sketchy mountains and unnamed rivers. No dragons or monsters lurk here, just blank spaces that refuse to be domesticated. In these silent patches, the map confesses its limits. No empire, no matter how grandiose its cartography, could truly contain the Earth's immensity. Unroll this silk scroll today, and you're witnessing not just a map but a mirage, the dream of a world made China-shaped, hovering just beyond the grasp of the emperors who commissioned it. The Vinland World Map of 1531 doesn't just chart the Earth, it cradles it quite literally in the form of a heart. This French cartographer's audacious design stretches continents across a delicate, symmetrical heart shape, a visual gamble that blends Renaissance artistry with stubborn geometric logic. At first glance, it's breathtaking. Coastlines curl like lace along the curves, and the oceans fan outward like veins. But this wasn't just whimsy. Vinland was wrestling with the era's greatest cartographic headache: how to flatten a spherical world onto parchment without butchering its proportions. His heart-shaped projection was a desperate, beautiful compromise, one that ultimately failed to solve the riddle but left behind a map so striking it still mesmerizes us today. Vinland's innovation lay in his attempt to balance aesthetics with function. Most world maps of his time either stretched landmasses grotesquely or split the Pacific in half to force the globe onto a rectangle. His heart shape, though bizarre, offered a clever workaround. By tapering the poles inward and bulging the equator, he minimized distortion in the most traveled regions: Europe, Africa, and the emerging Americas. Sailors could trace Atlantic routes with relative accuracy, while the less explored Arctic and Antarctic dissolved into graceful points. It was a poetic solution, treating the Earth less like a mathematical puzzle and more like a living organism. Yet the map's flaws glare as brightly as its brilliance. South America twists awkwardly, crammed into the heart's lower curve, while Asia's far edge fractures unnaturally. The projection symmetry, so pleasing to the eye, forced Vinland to fudge distances. A voyage from Lisbon to Canton might look straightforward on paper but would baffle any navigator trusting it. Even the heart's apex, where the globe's top should meet, splits into two ambiguous peaks, leaving the North Pole floating in cartographic limbo. For all its beauty, the map was ultimately a gorgeous dead end, a reminder that elegance alone couldn't conquer the merciless physics of projection. What makes Vinland's masterpiece unforgettable isn't its utility but its audacity. In an age when most mapmakers copied tired models, he dared to reimagine the world's very shape. His heart map whispers a truth we often forget. Every projection is a lie, some just prettier than others. Today's digital maps, with their algorithmic precision, owe no debt to Finay's failed experiment, but they lack its soul. Unfurl this parchment, and you're holding not just a map, but a love letter to the impossible dream of capturing our spherical home on flat paper. The map of Agrippa hides in plain sight, a lost masterpiece we know only through whispers in ancient texts, yet whose influence still echoes in every modern atlas. Commissioned by Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, Emperor Augustus's right-hand man, this colossal map wasn't just a geographical tool. It was a billboard for Roman supremacy, painted across marble in the empire's busiest porticos. Imagine walking through the Campus Martius in 1st century Rome, where the map stretched wall to wall, its vivid pigments tracing every road from Britannia's mists to Egypt's deserts. Citizens could literally step into the empire's sprawl, tracing the veins of conquest that bound the Mediterranean world together. What made Agrippa's map revolutionary wasn't its accuracy, though Pliny the Elder praised its measurements of the world, but its propaganda. Unlike Greek scrolls tucked away in libraries, this was geography as public spectacle. Key cities glinted with gold leaf, their size exaggerated to match political importance rather than physical scale. Rivers doubled as visual metaphors. The Danube and Rhine bristled with tiny carved forts, hammering home the message that Rome's borders were guarded and eternal. Even the materials screamed opulence: marble bases for Italian towns, cheaper paint for distant provinces, a hierarchy in stone and pigment. The map's ghostly presence reshaped Western cartography long after its physical destruction. Strabo's geography likely borrowed its framework, and medieval scholars still referenced Agrippa's distances when disputing the size of Africa, most telling. The Peutinger table's obsession with roads and way stations feels like a humble descendant of Agrippa's original vision, proof that even a vanished map can set a 1,000-year standard. Yet the real genius lay in its omissions. Germania and Parthia appeared as jagged blanks, their emptiness a silent threat. Here be enemies. The Mediterranean, by contrast, was a Roman lake, its shipping lanes inked as thick as major highways. This wasn't a map of the world as it was, but as Augustus wanted it seen, a stage where Rome played the sole lead. Why does a map that hasn't survived for 2 millennia still matter? Because it reminds us that every great empire writes its story in longitude and latitude. The next time you zoom into Google Earth, remember Agrippa's marble monument, where geography first became a language of power, one we're still fluent in today. The Catalan Atlas shimmers like a medieval Wikipedia page, except instead of hyperlinks, it's stitched together with gold leaf and whispered trade secrets. Crafted in 1375 by the Jewish cartographer Abraham Cresques of Majorca, this 6-panel masterpiece wasn't just a navigational aid. It was a visual encyclopedia of the 14th century world, blending Christian, Islamic, and Jewish knowledge into a single dazzling narrative. Unfold its vellum sheets, and you're suddenly eavesdropping on camel caravans crossing the Sahara, Venetian galleys unloading spices in Alexandria, and Mongol khans presiding over Silk Road cities Europeans had only heard of in travelers' tales. This wasn't geography as dogma, it was geography as gossip, pulsing with the messy, multicultural reality of the Mediterranean's golden age. What sets the Catalan Atlas apart is its mercantile heartbeat. Cresques, whose workshop sat at the crossroads of Christian and Muslim shipping lanes, had access to intelligence most European scholars could only dream of. His depiction of West Africa alone is staggering. Mansa Musa, the legendary Malian emperor, sits enthroned in gold-drenched splendor, a nod to his famous pilgrimage to Mecca that flooded Cairo with so much gold it crashed local markets for years. Nearby, camel trains wind through the Atlas Mountains toward Tagheza, the salt mining city where slabs of rock salt were traded ounce for ounce with gold dust. These weren't mythical wonders, they were business reports in ink designed for merchants and monarchs who saw the world as one sprawling marketplace. The map's treatment of Asia is even more revelatory. Marco Polo's travels, still fresh in European memory, materialize in cities like Quinsai, modern Hangzhou, depicted as a labyrinth of canals and bridges that dwarfed Venice. The Caspian Sea, usually mangled into a circle on European maps, stretches correctly north-south, likely thanks to Persian or Arab informants. Even the Indian Ocean teems with accuracy. Monsoon winds are hinted at with delicate brushstrokes, and Sri Lanka bulges large as a pepper-hungry sailor might exaggerate it. Cresques didn't just copy these details, he curated them, cross-referencing Genos port logs, Jewish merchant ledgers, and perhaps even whispers from the Nasrid court in Granada. Yet the atlas's true genius lies in its layered audience. For Christian kings like Charles V of France, who commissioned it, the map flaunted biblical landmarks like the Garden of Eden and the Tower of Babel. For Jewish viewers, Cresques' own community, it encoded subtler messages. The lost tribes of Israel hover near the edges, and Hebrew place names nestle alongside Latin ones. And for Muslim traders whose knowledge underpinned much of its Asian and African content, their contributions were anonymized but undeniable, from the Arabic-styled ships bobbing in the Indian Ocean to the precise latitudes of Mecca. The Catalan Atlas didn't just depict a connected world. It was that connection, a fragile paper bridge between cultures already starting to fracture under rising religious tensions. Today, the Atlas feels like a last gasp of Mediterranean cosmopolitanism. Within decades, the Black Death, pogroms, and the Inquisition would shred the networks that made such collaborations possible. Cresques himself, a Jew in a Christian kingdom, would see his world unravel as persecutions intensified. But for one luminous moment, his map held the chaos at bay, proving that the best maps aren't just guides to the earth, but mirrors of the minds that drew them, and the messy, magnificent exchanges that shaped them. Unroll these gilt-edged panels, and you're not just seeing continents, you're seeing a lost world where knowledge flowed as freely as gold across the sands. The Go Map forces us to rethink everything we assume about medieval England's understanding of its own landscape. Drawn around 1360 and rediscovered centuries later in the papers of an 18th-century antiquarian, this fragile sheepskin parchment reveals a kingdom caught between myth and meticulous record-keeping. At first glance, it's shockingly modern. Coastlines from Cornwall to Scotland ripple with surprising accuracy, and major rivers like the Thames and Severn carve through the countryside with precision. But then the oddities hit you. York sits nearly twice as far from London as it should. Wales crumples into an amorphous blob, and entire towns vanish while obscure villages glow like beacons. This isn't just a map, it's a riddle in ink, one that hints at a hidden purpose behind every deliberate inclusion and glaring absence. What makes the Go Map revolutionary is its focus on movement. Unlike earlier medieval maps crammed with allegory or religious symbolism, this one obsesses over practical details. Over 200 red lines spider across England, marking what scholars believe are royal highways or key trade routes. Each road is labeled with distances in Roman numerals, some so precise they match modern measurements within a few miles. The effect is uncanny. It's as if a 14th-century bureaucrat took a contemporary road atlas and stripped away everything but the essentials. Towns along these routes bulge with importance, their names scrawled in elaborate script, while regions off the beaten path shrink into oblivion. The message is clear. This map cares about where goods, soldiers, or tax collectors could travel, not about painting a pretty picture. But the map's true agenda hides in its gaps and exaggerations. Wales and Scotland are barely sketched despite being part of the same island, unless the map was never meant to guide travelers there. Some historians argue it served as a tax ledger, with detailed areas marking wealthy regions ripe for royal levies, while blank spaces indicated lands too poor or rebellious to bother with. Others see military fingerprints. The dense road networks around London and the Scottish border suggest strategic planning, perhaps for moving troops during the 100 Years' War or quelling local uprisings. Even the parchment itself whispers secrecy. Its small size, about the dimensions of a placemat, hints it was designed to be rolled up and carried by officials on the move. The most tantalizing clue lies in the map's treatment of water. Rivers intersecting major roads are marked with unusual care, some even noting fordable points. This wasn't just helpful trivia, it was critical intelligence for anyone needing to cross England quickly, whether to collect wool taxes or outrun an invading army. One theory suggests the map was commissioned by Edward III's Exchequer, the department handling royal finances. Tax collectors racing against harvest deadlines would have treasured such route details, while omissions like monasteries, usually powerhouses of wealth, might reflect their exemption from certain taxes. Yet for all its practicality, the Go map isn't devoid of artistry. The coastlines ripple with delicate strokes, and major cities sprout tiny illustrated walls and spires. Lincoln gets a cartoonish castle, and London's tower is a whimsical doodle, proof that even the most functional maps couldn't resist a flourish. These touches humanize what might otherwise feel like a bureaucratic tool, reminding us that the hands holding this sheepskin weren't just officials, but people who knew these towns as homes or hazards. Why does this scrappy, inconsistent map still captivate us? Because it captures England at a crossroads, no longer mapping the world through Scripture's lens, not yet reduced to grids and coordinates. It's a snapshot of a society learning to measure itself not by God's plan, but by the weight of wool sacks and the marching pace of soldiers. The next time you glance at a GPS blinking with real-time traffic updates, remember the Go map's red-inked roads, a medieval attempt to pin down the chaos of movement, one shaky line at a time. The Carta Marina is where Renaissance mapmaking shakes hands with Viking campfire tales, a sprawling, two-sheet masterpiece from 1539 that drapes Scandinavia in equal parts precision and fantasy. Created by Swedish Bishop Olaus Magnus, this map crackles with contradictions. Its coastlines trace Norway and Sweden with painstaking accuracy, yet the seas between them boil with creatures straight out of a medieval bestiary. One glance tells you this wasn't just a navigational aid. It was a love letter to Nordic heritage, painted at a time when Scandinavia was slipping from Catholic Europe's grasp under the tides of the Protestant Reformation. What makes the Carta Marina unforgettable are its monsters, not just decorative flourishes, but characters with backstories. Off Iceland's coast, a colossal lobster-like beast dubbed the Prista grips a ship in its claws, a possible nod to Kraken legends sailors whispered about. Nearby, a walrus suns itself on a rock, labeled Rose Maris, one of the first accurate depictions of the animal in European cartography. But the real showstopper is the swimming monks, hooded figures gliding through the Baltic with serene smiles, perhaps reflecting Olaus' own exiled Catholic order clinging to faith in hostile waters. These weren't random doodles. Each creature encoded local lore, warnings, or even inside jokes for Nordic viewers. Beneath the whimsy, though, lies a map shockingly serious about geography. Olaus spent 12 years compiling first-hand accounts from fishermen, traders, and fellow clerics, and it shows. The jagged fjords of Norway mirror modern charts, while the Gulf of Bothnia's curve is rendered with a precision that would have made Ptolemy jealous. Even the inland details dazzle. Reindeer herds scatter across Lapland, and the Dovrefjell Mountains rise like a spine through Norway, details no other European mapmaker had ever bothered to record. This wasn't just copying coastal outlines, it was an act of cultural preservation, capturing a Scandinavia most Europeans dismissed as a frozen backwater. The map's political undercurrents run just as deep. Olaus, a Catholic loyalist fleeing Lutheran Sweden, used the Carta Marina to remind Europe of Scandinavia's grandeur. The Swedish coat of arms dominates the center, while Uppsala's cathedral, soon to be stripped of its Catholic relics, towers undiminished. Even the monsters served a purpose. By populating Protestant waters with terrors, Olaus might have been slyly suggesting that heresy bred chaos. Yet for all its agenda, the map pulses with genuine affection for the North. snowflakes drift delicately over Finland, and Sami herders pitch their tents with ethnographic care, rare dignity for a people often caricatured as barbarians. Why does this riot of ink and imagination still captivate us? Because the Carta Marina refuses to choose between art and science. It's a reminder that every map is a conversation between what we know and what we fear, between hard-won data and the stories we tell to fill the gaps. Modern charts may have banished sea monsters to legend, but Olaus' masterpiece invites us to wonder, what myths are we ignoring today simply because we've convinced ourselves we've mapped everything worth seeing? The Malkun map is more than a navigational chart. It's the silent architect of one of history's most audacious maritime adventures. Painted on a scroll nearly 20 feet long during the Ming Dynasty, this intricate document didn't just guide Zheng his treasure fleets across the Indian Ocean. It encoded the entire logic of pre-modern Asian seafaring in strokes of ink and cryptic annotations. Unlike European portolan charts with their radiating compass lines, the Malkun map operates on a grid of compass bearings, a system so precise that modern historians have used it to retrace the fleet stops from Java to Zanzibar. Each coastal snippet is labeled not just with place names, but with star readings, tidal patterns, and even warnings about pirate havens, a sailor's survival kit painted on silk. What's extraordinary is how the map turns geography into rhythm. Instead of plotting continuous coastlines, it breaks voyages into discrete legs, each marked with a duration measured in jengs, a unit based on the Night's Watch system. A typical entry might read, from Malacca to Ceylon, steer southwest for 10 jengs at the Big Dipper's third star. This wasn't just navigation, it was celestial choreography, blending astronomy with muscle memory. Pilots didn't need to see the shore, they needed to feel the timing of tides and the tilt of constellations, trusting the map's terse poetry to keep them on course. The system was so robust that some bearings still align with modern GPS coordinates within a margin of mere miles. Yet the Malkun map's true genius lies in its omissions. Unlike Western maps obsessed with filling blank spaces, it leaves vast stretches of open ocean eerily empty, not out of ignorance, but because Chinese junks hugged the coasts whenever possible. The map's sparse interiors reflect a pragmatic reality. Sailors cared about safe harbors, not uncharted hinterlands. Even the artful distortions reveal priorities. Sumatra bulges grotesquely, not because cartographers misunderstood its shape, but because its northern ports were critical resupply points. Every bend in the coastline whispers a calculated trade-off between accuracy and utility. The map's legacy is shadowed by paradox. Commissioned to celebrate Zheng his voyages, it became a relic of their abrupt end. By the mid-15th century, the Ming court had banned ocean-going expeditions, and the treasure fleet's records were purged. The Malkun map survived only because it was tucked into a military encyclopedia, a ghost of what might have been. Today, it's a testament to the fleeting moment when China ruled the waves not with brute force, but with ink-stained scrolls that taught sailors to dance with the stars. The Erde II map isn't just a relic of the Yuan dynasty, it's a bureaucratic revolution inked onto paper, a masterclass in how the Mongols turned geography into governance. Created during the 13th century under Kublai Khan's rule, this sprawling grid-based chart wasn't designed for exploration or myth-making. It was the Excel spreadsheet of its era, meticulously plotting the empire's arteries to squeeze efficiency from every mile of territory. While European maps of the same period were busy sketching dragons and saints, the Erde II reduced the chaos of empire to clean, methodical squares, each one a snapshot of taxes, troops, and trade routes. This wasn't cartography for poets, it was cartography for conquerors. What sets the Erde II apart is its ruthless pragmatism. Unlike traditional Chinese maps that prioritized celestial harmony or the symbolic Middle Kingdom, this map embraced the Mongol obsession with control. Its grid system, echoing the Lygia method of household registration, divided the empire into uniform administrative blocks, each tied to a specific cluster of villages, pastures, or garrisons. Officials could trace a finger along the lines and instantly calculate how many horses could be requisitioned from a given district or how much grain needed shipping to Karakoram. The precision is staggering. Some grids even note the number of taxable adults per unit, transforming ink and paper into a weapon of statecraft. But the map's genius lies in its adaptability. The Yuan dynasty straddled a dozen cultures, from Han Chinese rice farmers to Central Asian silk traders, and the Erdős grids flexed to accommodate them all. In the north, squares clustered around nomadic grazing lands, tracking seasonal migrations with dotted lines. Along the Grand Canal, the grids tightened, mirroring the dense pulse of commerce. Historians argue this system was a precursor to modern GIS, layering demographic, economic, and geographic data into a single visual interface. Forget satellite imagery. The Mongols managed their empire with brushstrokes and abacus math. Yet the map's cold efficiency couldn't mask its fragility. Rebellions flared where grids were stretched too thin, and local officials often fudged numbers to evade imperial demand. The Erdős, for all its innovation, was ultimately a snapshot of ambition, a dream of order imposed on a world that kept resisting. Today, it survives as a whisper of how empires try and fail to grid the ungriddable. The next time you tap a smartphone map to check traffic or property lines, remember, you're using the digital ghost of a Mongol clerk's quill, scratching order onto the unruly earth. Buried under a prehistoric burial mound in France for millennia, the St. Bélec slab doesn't look like much at first, just a broken chunk of Bronze Age rock, rough-edged and weathered. But tilt it toward the light and the surface comes alive. Precise grooves carve out winding rivers, circular hollows mark hilltops, and repeating patterns form what might be fields or settlements. Dated to around 4,000 years ago, this 5 by 6 foot stone is Europe's oldest known candidate for a three-dimensional map, a relic so ahead of its time that archaeologists initially dismissed it as abstract art when first unearthed in 1900. Only recent laser scans revealed the shocking truth. Those random markings match the Odet River Valley and surrounding ridges with eerie precision, down to an 80% overlap with the actual landscape. Imagine a Neolithic surveyor kneeling in the mud, pecking at this stone to immortalize their world in tactile form, not for decoration but for something far more urgent: control. What's revolutionary about the St. Bélec slab isn't just its age, it's the sheer ambition of its perspective. Unlike cave paintings or later Roman maps fixated on routes, this is terrain captured in relief, demanding viewers run their fingers over its contours to feel the lay of the land. The deeper grooves likely trace major waterways critical for travel and agriculture, while shallower lines could mark territorial boundaries between clans. One cluster of cup-shaped depressions near the river might represent a central settlement, possibly the power center of whoever commissioned this stone. That's the real twist. This wasn't a wandering artist's doodle. The slab was found smashed and repurposed as a tomb wall, suggesting it was deliberately broken when the ruling class it celebrated fell from power. Maps have always been political, but here, 4,000 years ago, we see the raw birth of that idea: geography as a weapon of legitimacy, then as a casualty of rebellion. The mysteries multiply when you consider how it was made. Without metal tools or written language, how did Bronze Age people achieve such accuracy? One theory points to the slab's material, a metamorphic rock called schist, soft enough to carve but durable enough to survive centuries. Artists might have used cordage or wooden templates to transfer distances from the ground to the stone, pacing out key landmarks and scaling them down. Even more intriguing are the symbols. A few recurring motifs resemble later Celtic icons for earth and water, hinting at a symbolic language lost to time. This slab wasn't just a functional guide, it was likely sacred, a blend of deed and scripture that tied a people to their land in the eyes of the gods. But the St. Balak map's true brilliance lies in its stubborn refusal to fit modern assumptions. We expect ancient maps to be primitive, yet here's a three-dimensional terrain model millennia before contour lines became standard. We assume territorial maps emerged with agriculture, yet this predates even the pyramids. Most humbling of all, the area it depicts spans just 12 miles, a microscopic slice of the world by today's standards, but for the society that made it, this was the entire universe, painstakingly etched in stone to declare, "This is ours." The next time you glance at GPS zooming across continents, remember the St. Balak slab. Before empires, before alphabets, someone held a rock and dared to claim the earth by drawing it in miniature, one stubborn chip at a time. The Codex Mendoza is a document caught between two worlds, part Aztec tribute ledger, part Spanish propaganda tool, and entirely a masterpiece of survival. Created in 1541, just 20 years after Cortés toppled Tenochtitlan, this illustrated manuscript was commissioned by the first Spanish viceroy of Mexico to explain the conquered empire to King Charles V. But what makes it extraordinary isn't just the Spanish agenda. It's the undeniable fingerprints of indigenous artists and informants who smuggled their own history into its pages. The Codex unfolds like a visual epic divided into three sections: the founding of Tenochtitlan, the conquests of each Aztec ruler, and a meticulous inventory of goods demanded from subject cities, from jaguar pelts to bins of maize. Every feather, every glyph, every splash of cochineal red is a silent negotiation between the colonizers who ordered it and the scribes who refused to let their world be erased. Take the tribute section, a sprawling grid of cities paired with illustrations of their payments. At first glance, it's a cold accounting of imperial extraction, designed to show Charles V the wealth flowing from his new domain. But look closer. The artist depicted feather headdresses with such precision that ornithologists can identify the exact Quetzal and Peutinger species used. The bundles of cotton are tied in traditional knots, and the jade beads mirror those found in archaeological digs. These aren't generic symbols, they're insider knowledge, details only someone raised in the Aztec tribute system would know. Even the organization rebels subtly. While Spanish documents listed goods by monetary value, the Codex groups items by sacred significance, placing cacao, a ritual drink, alongside golden ornaments rather than with mundane foodstuffs. The scribes, likely trained in the Tlacuilo tradition of painting writing, were embedding their cosmology into a document meant to serve their conquerors. The conquest pages burn with even quieter defiance. Spanish captions frame each campaign as a series of neat dominoes falling to Aztec might, but the accompanying visuals tell a messier story. When depicting the reign of Moctezuma I, the artist shows defeated warriors not as broken subjects but as dignified figures, their city-states represented by intact glyphs, a nod to the complex alliances and resistances the Spanish simplifications ignored. One panel even sneaks in a reference to the Flower Wars, ritual battles the Aztecs used to train warriors and capture sacrificial victims. To the Spanish, this might have looked like another military victory. To Nahua viewers, it was a coded reminder of their spiritual practices, smuggled into the record under the guise of imperial propaganda. Yet the Codex's true heartbreak lies in its unfinished edges. The final pages, meant to depict daily Aztec life under Spanish rule, were never completed, likely abandoned when the viceroy realized the document wouldn't survive the voyage to Spain. Pirates intercepted the ship, and the Codex ended up in France, forgotten for centuries. Today, it's a palimpsest of what was lost and what stubbornly endured. The Spanish got their tribute lists, but the Nahua artists ensured their descendants would still hear the hum of marketplaces, the rustle of tribute cloth, and the whisper of glyphs saying, "We were here." The Codex Mendoza doesn't just record history, it is history, a battlefield where ink and memory outlasted empires. Imagine a map so whimsical it resembles a child's sketch of a lucky clover, yet beneath its playful curves lies a theological bombshell. The Bunting Cloverleaf Map, crafted by Lutheran theologian Heinrich Bunting in 1581, slices the world into three lobes radiating from Jerusalem, the stem holding this geographic flower together. Europe, Africa, and Asia each occupy a petal, their coastlines warped to fit the sacred geometry of the Trinity. This wasn't just bad geography, it was Reformation propaganda in ink, a defiant rebuke to Catholic Mappa Mundi that placed Rome at the center of spiritual authority. Bunting's clover screamed, "True faith blooms from Jerusalem alone." What makes this design more than just eccentric is its deliberate distortion. The map's circular form echoes medieval TO maps, where the world splits into three continents divided by seas shaped like a T, but Bunting dials the symbolism to 11. Jerusalem doesn't just anchor the layout, it sprouts veins resembling Christ's cross, while the Red Sea blazes crimson like a slash of divine judgment. Even the clover's three leaves mirror Luther's emphasis on salvation through faith, grace, and scripture. Every visual choice was theological guerrilla warfare, smuggled into a format even illiterate congregations could grasp. Hold up this map during a sermon and the message was instant. The earth itself testified to Protestant truth. Yet the cloverleaf's charm lies in its awkward marriage of zeal and practicality. Squint past the holy geometry and you'll spot real navigational details tucked between the dogma. The Rhine River wiggles recognizably through Germany's petal, and Scandinavia's jagged outline, though crammed into an awkward corner, hints at Bunting's use of emerging Dutch charts. Even the oceans, though stripped of monsters, bear labels like Mare Germanicum, a nod to rising northern European maritime pride. This was holy cartography with one foot in the real world, a transitional fossil between medieval symbolism and the Enlightenment's measured grids. The map's afterlife is its own irony. Intended as a teaching tool for Lutherans, it became a collector's curiosity among Catholic nobility, who prized its artistry while ignoring its heresy. Today, the cloverleaf endures not as theology but as proof that maps are never neutral. They bend the world to fit the minds and agendas of those who draw them. Next time you see a map claiming pure objectivity, remember Bunting's leafy trifold and ask, what gospel is this projection preaching? The Mitchell map wasn't just a snapshot of North America, it was the scalpel that carved up a continent. Published in 1755 by British cartographer John Mitchell, this 6-foot-wide masterpiece emerged in the wake of the French and Indian War, a conflict that redrew the global balance of power. At first glance, its delicate hand coloring and elegant script feel like typical 18th century geography. But zoom in, and you'll see the fingerprints of empire. Every mountain range, every river bend, every tribal territory was a chess piece in a high-stakes diplomatic game. The British Crown didn't just want a map, they needed a weapon to justify their claims from the Appalachians to the Mississippi, and Mitchell delivered. What made this map explosive was its selective precision. Mitchell, a botanist by training with no first-hand knowledge of the interior, relied on a patchwork of colonial governors, fur traders, and most crucially, confiscated French surveys. The result was a document that exaggerated British territorial control while downplaying indigenous sovereignty. Take the Ohio Valley, a region hotly contested by France, Britain, and Shawnee and Delaware nations. Mitchell's rendering scrubbed away complex native alliances, reducing the area to blank space labeled parts undiscovered. This wasn't ignorance, it was strategy. By omitting indigenous polities, the map implied the land was ripe for British taking, a visual argument that would later haunt treaty negotiations. The map's political venom crystallized in its treatment of borders. Mitchell's boundaries stretched British claims deep into French-held Louisiana, with the Mississippi River demoted to a mere dotted line. When the Treaty of Paris ended the war in 1763, negotiators literally unrolled Mitchell's map on the table, using its lines TO Chinese letter continents. France ceded Canada, Spain surrendered Florida, and Britain's colonies suddenly doubled in size, all because ink on parchment had rewritten reality. Yet the map's most insidious legacy was its ripple effect. It became the template for the Proclamation Line of 1763, which barred colonists from settling west of the Appalachians. That decision, meant to placate native nations, instead fueled colonial resentment and sowed seeds of revolution. Mitchell's work also exposed cartography's dark double standard. While European powers treated borders as immutable, indigenous territories appeared fluid or invisible. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy, a formidable diplomatic power, was reduced to a scattering of huts, while Cherokee hunting grounds vanished into shaded wastelands. This wasn't just bias, it was erasure with a purpose. By denying native spatial legitimacy, the map made displacement seem inevitable. Even natural features bent to imperial will. Rivers were straightened to ease navigation for British troops, and mountain passes narrowed to funnel settlers into controlled corridors. Yet the map's greatest irony lies in its afterlife. Decades later, during the American Revolution and War of 1812, both British and American officials clutched copies of Mitchell's work, now hopelessly outdated, to argue over the very borders they'd manipulated. The map that had once enabled conquest became a fossil, its distortions frozen in time even as the land's true complexity refused to conform. Today, it's a cautionary tale. Every border we take for granted began as someone's hunch, someone's gamble, someone's lie inked onto paper. Maps don't just reflect power, they manufacture it, one deliberate line at a time. The stick charts of Micronesia defy everything we assume about navigation because they aren't maps of land at all. These intricate lattices of palm ribs and cowrie shells, knotted together with hand-spun fiber, chart something invisible to the untrained eye, the ocean's pulse. Unlike European maps obsessed with coastlines and compass points, these palm strip puzzles mapped the language of swells, the dance of currents, and the secret pathways between islands that could be felt but not seen. For centuries, Micronesian navigators held these charts in their laps as they crossed thousands of miles of open Pacific, not with telescopes or sextants, but by reading the sea's rippling braille. What makes these charts revolutionary is their abstraction. A curved palm strip might represent the refraction of waves around an atoll, while cowrie shells mark where opposing currents collide, creating telltale disturbances. The most common type, called matang, wasn't even meant for travel. It was a teaching tool, a three-dimensional textbook of how ocean swells bend around unseen islands. Apprentices would run their fingers over its grid, learning to feel disturbances in the water's rhythm long before land appeared on the horizon. Other charts, like the Meadow, plotted specific island groups by their unique swell signatures, while Rebelib covered entire archipelago chains. None of them showed literal shapes or distances. Instead, they encoded a kinetic grammar of the sea, one that required years of apprenticeship to decode. This system worked because Micronesian navigators thought in 4 dimensions. Stars guided them at night, but daylight demanded a different literacy, reading how waves interacted with distant landmasses. A seasoned navigator could detect an atoll beyond the horizon by how its mass interrupted deep ocean swells, sending back reflected patterns or shadow-like calm patches. Storms were navigational aids too. Their disruption of normal wave trains acted like arrows pointing toward shelter. The stick charts didn't just record this knowledge, they compressed generations of observation into tactile shorthand, allowing sailors to hold the ocean's logic in their hands. The real magic lay in their portability. Unlike parchment maps ruined by saltwater, these palm ribs floated if dropped overboard. Shells could be replaced mid-voyage, and the entire chart folded into a bundle when not in use. But their brilliance had a dark side because the system relied on oral tradition and hands-on training. Colonial disruption nearly erased it. Missionaries dismissed the charts as primitive art, and Western schools imposed compass-based navigation, severing threads of knowledge woven over millennia. Today, only a handful of elders preserve the full artistry of Wofanu, the wave-finding science behind the sticks, yet the stick chart's legacy refuses to sink. Modern oceanographers now study their principles to understand how traditional navigators detected islands from wave refraction, a skill satellite imaging can't replicate. NASA even consulted Micronesian elders to develop analog navigation systems for astronauts in case of electronic failure. These humble palm strips, once brushed off as ethnographic curiosities, are now recognized as masterpieces of spatial intelligence, proving that the truest maps aren't always drawn in ink but felt in the rise and fall of the waves. The Mappa Mundi of Albi strips cartography down to its barest bones. No gold leaf, no sea monsters, not even a whiff of decoration. Painted in the 8th century on a parchment barely larger than a placemat, this French map reduces the known world to a sparse network of dots and lines, a handful of cities connected by faint routes, all orbiting Jerusalem at the center. Compared to the Hereford Mappa Mundi's technicolor chaos, Albi feels like a monk's rough sketch, dashed off between Vespers and supper, but in that starkness lies its power. This wasn't a map meant to dazzle or terrify. It was a meditational tool, compressing the earth into a purity of purpose that reflected the early medieval church's inward turn. What's striking is how ruthlessly Albi filters reality through scripture. Only 23 locations earn ink, all biblical heavyweights like Babylon, Rome, and Nineveh, while entire continents vanish. The Nile River appears, but solely because Moses floated on it. The Mediterranean's vastness shrinks to a squiggle labeled simply Mare Magnum. Even the sparse geography bends to theology. The map's T-shape, a nod to the medieval TO tradition, frames the world as a divine hierarchy, with Asia swelling above the crossbar as Christ's inheritance and Europe and Africa shrinking below. Every omission was deliberate. Why clutter the soul's journey with Alps or trade routes when the road to salvation needed no landmarks? The contrast with Hereford couldn't be starker. Where Hereford crams in Alexander the Great's wall and dog-headed tribes, Albi's creator, likely a scribe at the Albi Cathedral, cared only for spiritual waypoints. Cities aren't drawn as bustling metropolises but as stylized towers, their height signaling religious stature. Jerusalem's spire punches skyward, while secular powerhouses like Paris go unmentioned. Even the ink tells a story. No expensive pigments here, just muted browns and reds scraped from local earth. This was cartography as monastic discipline, a rejection of worldly distraction centuries before the Reformation. Yet Albi's quiet genius emerges in its subtle innovations. The routes linking cities aren't random. They trace the paths of apostles and prophets, transforming geography into sacred biography. A line from Jerusalem to Rome doesn't just mark a road, it retraces Paul's missionary journeys. Babylon sits exiled to the edge, a visual echo of its fall in Psalms. The map even sneaks in a quiet jab at Islamic expansion. Though created during the Umayyad Caliphate's peak, it renders Arabia as a blank, as if denying the rival faith's footprint. Every minimal stroke carries weight. What makes this humble parchment unforgettable isn't its accuracy, but its restraint. In an age when most maps shouted, Albi whispered, and in doing so revealed how deeply geography could serve devotion. While later Mappa Mundi drowned viewers in spectacle, this earlier vision trusted that less might guide the soul farther. Unfold it today, and you're not seeing the world as it was, but as the cloistered mind longed for it to be, stripped of excess with all roads leading toward grace. The Urbano Monte map is what happens when a Renaissance polymath tries to cram the entire universe onto 60 sheets of paper, a swirling, hand-painted fever dream where science, art, and sheer obsession collide. Created in 1587 by the Milanese nobleman Urbano Monti, this 9-foot-wide planisphere doesn't just depict the world, it reimagines it from a god's eye view, placing the North Pole at the center and unfurling the continents in concentric rings like petals on a celestial flower. At first glance, the distortion is jarring Antarctica balloons into a massive landmass encircling the Earth, while Europe and Asia curl unnaturally around the edges. But this wasn't a mistake, it was a radical attempt to solve cartography's oldest problem: how to flatten a spherical planet without tearing its seams. Monti's polar projection was centuries ahead of its time. Today, we're familiar with this perspective from modern maps like the UN flag, but in the 16th century, it was heresy against the Ptolemaic grid. Monti defended his choice with meticulous notes, arguing that a pole-centric view better reflected Earth's true axis and the paths of celestial bodies. His map even includes a rotating paper dial, an early volvel allowing viewers to spin the heavens above the Earth, blending astronomy with geography. The effect is hypnotic. Constellations wheel over kingdoms and zodiac signs hover like cosmic chaperones. For Monti, this wasn't just a map, it was a working model of the cosmos, a marriage of math and mysticism. Yet the real magic lies in the details Monti smuggled into his masterpiece. Between the latitude lines and compass roses, he stuffed the margins with vignettes of global cultures: samurai duel in Japan, Inca nobles parade through Cusco, and a lone rhinoceros likely cribbed from Dura's famous woodcut tromps across Africa. Even more surprising are the gaps he admits. Where other mapmakers filled unknowns with monsters, Monti leaves patches blank, scribbling notes like terra incognita or "here be dragons" with a wink, acknowledging the limits of European knowledge. His depiction of California as an island, though wrong, reveals how even the most meticulous minds were at the mercy of sailors' tall tales. The map's production is its own epic. Monti hand-painted just 3 copies, mixing costly lapis, lazuli blues, and gold leaf with the painstaking precision of an illuminated manuscript. Each of the 60 sheets interlocks like a puzzle, designed to be mounted on a wooden panel and spun like a lazy Susan, a Renaissance infographic meant for interactive exploration. Historians suspect Monti, who hosted salons for scholars and artists, envisioned his creation as a teaching tool, a way to walk wealthy patrons through the wonders of an expanding world without leaving their palazzos. What makes the Urbano Monti map unforgettable isn't just its beauty or innovation, but its humanity. Between the precise coastlines and astrological diagrams, Monti doodled himself into a corner, a tiny self-portrait where he kneels, offering his map to the Duke of Milan. It's a humble punchline to a work of towering ambition, a reminder that even the grandest attempts to capture the Earth are, in the end, the work of one curious soul with a brush and too much ink. Today, digitized versions let us spin his world as intended, and the illusion holds. For a moment we're 16th century nobles, gripping the edges of the known universe and giving it a whirl. From the Babylonian clay tablet sketching a disc-shaped world ringed by cosmic oceans, to the Cangnido map's silk-draped assertion of Korean global awareness, ancient maps were never just about geography. They were statements of power, whispers of myth, and sometimes startlingly practical tools. The Peutinger table reduced Rome's sprawling empire to a subway-style itinerary, while the Hereford Mappa Mundi turned theology into topography, plotting salvation and damnation alongside real rivers and cities. These maps didn't just chart lands, they charted fears, ambitions, and the limits of human knowledge. What's astonishing is how fluid their purposes were. The stick charts of Micronesia encoded the language of waves into palm ribs and shells, a tactile GPS for sailors who navigated by feel. Meanwhile, the Borgia map painted on oxhide wove biblical time into physical space, letting viewers trace Moses' footsteps across the same parchment that marked contemporary trade routes. Some, like the Selden map, were pure mercantile muscle crowded with ports and tariffs, while others, like the heart-shaped whimsy of Orontius Finay's work, dared to reimagine the planet's very form. Yet beneath this dizzying variety, a common thread emerges. Every culture mapped what mattered to it. The Inuit carved coastlines into driftwood to survive. The Mongols gridded their empire into tax zones. Medieval monks sketched Jerusalem as the axis of existence. These maps reveal less about the shape of the earth and more about the shape of human priority. Even their errors are revelations. Ptolemy's miscalculations that led Columbus astray, or Waldseemüller's accidental christening of America, prove how cartography is a dialogue between perception and reality. So what's the legacy of these ancient cartographers? They remind us that every map is a portrait of its maker's mind, a snapshot of what a society knew or thought it knew at a single fleeting moment. The next time you glance at your phone's pixel-perfect GPS, spare a thought for those Babylonian scribes pressing lines into clay, or the Micronesian navigators reading the ocean's pulse in a handful of sticks. Their maps were more than directions, they were stories, and we're still telling them. Now it's your turn. Which of these maps captivated you the most? Was it the stolen secrets of the Cantino planisphere, the sacred geometry of the Hereford Mappa Mundi, or something else entirely? Drop your pick in the comments. Let's keep the conversation as boundless as the worlds these maps dared to imagine.